Hi, I'm Rich Trafton with the New Brain for Business Institute. If you're following news, you see a lot about BP and their problems. You know, they're a front page of example of how things can go wrong. We often pay attention to what's going on in the world to look for examples in the business world of new brain and old brain behavior at work. See if there's something we can learn from that. In the case of BP, what got my attention recently and kind of stimulated this conversation is the comment by the outgoing CEO, Tony Hayward, that BP was a very socially responsible organization. Now, I don't know whether they are or not, but it does seem odd to me to look at the last decade or so of BP, where you have multiple oil line spills in Alaska, you have a fatal refinery fire in Texas City, Texas, and you have a fatal drilling platform fire in the Gulf of Mexico, and then you have this monumental environmental disaster that goes with that. So the question isn't, are they socially responsible or not? The real question of interest is, how does one maintain a story like that in one's mind when there's a lot of evidence to the contrary? Mr. Hayward seems to have a firm belief that they're a very socially responsible organization. Maybe they are, but it's tough to get a grip on that with the evidence outstanding. And so, how do we make sense of those sort of public proclamations? How do you maintain these stories that you feel certain about, but others can look at and go, wait a minute, that seems kind of odd? And, our belief is that people don't have an intention to lie to us. They don't intentionally try and deceive us. Most people believe pretty strongly in what they have to say. And in fact, it is a natural inclination in us, a natural brain process for us to be very certain in our stories about ourselves. So with respect to the most recent BP disaster, I haven't seen so far a single person step up and say, that was my fault, I made a mistake, I'm the one. Why is that? I mean, this is obviously a really big problem, and nobody seems to be stepping up to that. So what are the stories that people have in their head that make that tolerable for them? Well, each of us has in our mind a story about ourselves, about who we are, about our capabilities, about our skills, and about our intentions. And, it'd be no surprise to hear that, those are pretty positive stories. Most of us view ourselves as capable, well-intentioned people. And I suspect that the people at BP are no different. And so when something goes wrong, that's inconsistent with our story. So we have to find some other description for what went on. That other person was to blame. That process failed. It wasn't really me. My story remains, and I am certain about it. And the real critical issue here is not the rightness or wrongness of BP's story, whether somebody made a mistake or not. The issue is what happens when we get certain about ourselves, about our stories. In our experience, when people get certain, problems start to crop up. Problems that we sure wish we didn't have often. So how do you know if you're a victim of certainty, or whether your organization is a victim of certainty? Well, are you getting surprised? Holy cow, how could that have happened? I can imagine, when that oil platform blew up, and not that many years after their refinery blew up in Texas City, you'd have to say that was a surprise. When you get a big surprise like, holy cow, what happened there? That should be an indicator to you that perhaps certainty has set in. Perhaps you're stuck with certainty or stuck in certainty. Another indicator of certainty setting in is when people are reluctant to take things up the chain of command, when they resist pointing out problems. It looks like, hey, I'm not going to take that to the boss. There's no way I'm going to be the person who tells them. There's this resistance to passing it up the line because they already have a story they're certain about and they don't want to hear my story. So when certainty sets in, you're in for some trouble. So what can you do about it? There are a couple of things you can do. One of our favorites is find a way to suspend the certainty, even if it's just for a few minutes. So instead of saying, we're a socially responsible company, period, say something like, I feel in my heart that we're a socially responsible company and we strive for that, but let's just for a minute, amongst ourselves here, let's just imagine that that's not true. So what would be the consequences of assuming temporarily that that wasn't true? Well, what would we see? What are the events that follow from that foundation? Well, we would expect to see problems. Well, what would we do if we saw those problems? Well, we would react to them. We have an explosion, we have a fire, we have a leak. What do we do? Well, we redouble our efforts in the arena of safety. We make safety our primary strategic intention. We increase safety metrics. We increase training in safety. We tighten up our process discipline. Those are just some of the things you can do. But what happens when you suspend your certainty for a minute, you get an opportunity to see things a little bit differently. So, even if we are socially responsible, maybe some extra safety training would be a good idea anyway. Maybe some additional metrics would be a good idea anyway. So you don't have to convince yourself that you are wrong. Just for a moment, suspend your certainty and see what other alternatives appear that previously were hidden or eclipsed by your certainty. If you take a moment and get outside your certain view, options and alternatives become available to you that weren't visible to you before. And those alternatives often are of value whether your certainty is correct or not. So with all apologies to BP, that's our point of view on certainty and its effect on organizational performance, or at least a small slice of it. You can always see what else we're up to on our website, newbrainforbusiness.com. And thanks for listening.